Hi, I'm Doug from Dynamic Computing, and welcome to episode 107 of 10 Minute Amiga Retro Cast. This week, we're continuing on with our exploration of the Amiga 600 machine that I got from my pal Sanxian, aka Tim Drew, over in the United Kingdom. Take a look at my video from last week of the unboxing of the Amiga 600. It's kind of fun. This week, we're going to dig deeper into the Amiga 600 and explore its place in the Amiga family. The Amiga 600 was released in March of 1992, nearly 2 years after the release of the Amiga 3000. Now this is important because the Amiga 3000 introduced us to Amiga Os 2.x, which was fantastic, by the way, and it introduced us to the Super Agnes and the Super Denise, which gave us our 2 megabytes of chip RAM and our ECS enhanced chipset that we're all so familiar with now. Now, the original plan was to bring out a machine that was less expensive than the Amiga 500 while still being powerful and usable. This machine would have been called the A300, and it would have been less expensive than the Amiga 500 because it used a smaller keyboard, it used SMD caps on the motherboard, which we're all real familiar with now, thanks guys, and it has all of the custom chips soldered right onto the board. In the past, they were always just socketed on there. Now, in a perfect world, this little machine would have come out at about the same time as the Amiga 3000, and it would have heralded the retirement of the venerable Amiga 500 that had been with us since 1987. But the Amiga 500 was still selling really well in 1990 and 1991. So they just couldn't justify bringing out a different machine. Second, the Amiga 300 started suffering from feature creep, where the designers kept adding item after item and tool after tool onto the Amiga 300, and every time jacking the price up a little bit. When the machine was officially ready for launch in 1992, we were only a few months away from the actual official release of the Amiga 1200. Just didn't make any sense. The Amiga 600 did come out, but it came out at a price that was pretty much the same as the Amiga 500 Plus, and the 500 Plus had more features and was more expandable, and people were just kind of like, huh? Virtually the entire Amiga community, including us in the United States, looked at the Amiga 600, we shrugged our shoulders, and we went, why, Commodore? Why? When it finally came out, it was underpowered, overpriced, and about 18 months too late. Now don't get me wrong, the Amiga 600 is an absolutely capable machine, absolutely. We would have all drooled and lusted over this thing back in 1990, without a doubt. In addition to being adorable, which it is, we'll look at it closer in just a second, it's got a 68,000 chip clocked at our normal 7.16 megahertz in NTSC land, a megabyte of chip RAM expandable to 2 megabytes with an easy to install expansion right in the bottom, and it could handle up to 4 megabytes of fast RAM with a PCMCIA card slotted into the side. And that's what Commodore decided your RAM expansion was going to be. They didn't anticipate any of the others that came along later. Most importantly, it had an integrated IDE interface connected right up to the CPU that would allow us to use standard 2.5-inch IDE laptop hard drives right in our Amigas, which was really cool. But the one thing our Amiga 500s taught us over the years was that they were crazy expandable. If you wanted to slot an expansion on the side and put an 040 with 64 megs of RAM and a SCSI hard drive and a real-time clock, boom, right on the side, you're just rocking an awesome little Amiga 500. But the Amiga 600 was lacking anything close to that. PCMCIA, in their minds, was designed for memory. Later on, we came out with, the ability to use some networking cards, some SCSI controllers, video and audio capture, that kind of thing. And the belly expansion couldn't do much more than just add a real-time clock and 1 megabyte of chip RAM. So all the expansions that we had and were available on our Amiga 500, they just weren't available on the Amiga 600. So once again, we shrugged our shoulders and we all said, Why, Commodore? Why? So we've determined that the Amiga 600 was too expensive, too late, and not expandable enough. And all of those things were absolutely 100% accurate. And that's probably why the thing sold like garbage, especially here in the United States. We just expected more. But what could they have done to make this a success? And I think it could have been a success if they'd played their card right and just done a few little things differently. I have some thoughts on this, but I'd love to hear what you guys have to say about these thoughts. And you think, you know, would it have gone anywhere? Take a listen. So here's our beautiful little Amiga 600 right here. So what would I have done different? Well, I would have kept this form factor because I think it's a cool little form factor. Some people bellyache because of the lack of the numeric keypad, but it's not the end of the world, and there's things that could have been done for that. Dump the PCMCIA over here on the side, just completely get rid of it. It's useless, but keep the internal IDE. Second, replace this PCMCIA over here with a smaller but pin compatible Zorro 1 slot, just like the Amiga 1000, the Amiga 500 had. Literally, make it smaller, make it this big instead of that big, with the smaller pins that were commonly available, but make it physically pin-to-pin compatible. This would have allowed a new generation of slot-on-the-side expansions for the Amiga 600 that were designed to fit the case, but the connections with the 68,000 bus would still be there, so accelerators could be added on too. Now, Commodore could have sold a little interface, $50, that converts the smaller Amiga 600 slot on the side with the larger Amiga 500, okay? This means the people who had their Amiga 500 and they'd expanded the daylights out of it could actually use those expansions. They may not look as pretty, you know, they may rise up a little higher, the angle wouldn't be quite right, but the adapter wouldn't have to be very big, and it would have allowed us to keep our existing upgrades. Then release this in mid to late 1990, a couple months after the Amiga 3000. That would let the people who wanted to drop a load of money on a 3000, you know, take advantage of that. But then us Amiga 500 users could go, heck, I want the ECS chipset, I want a 2 megabyte Agnes, I want to be able to reuse all my slot on the side peripherals. I'm getting the Amiga 600 for $250. But of course, this didn't happen, and my DeLorean's in the shop, so I can't go back in time and change it right now. I wish I could. Does this mean the Amiga 600 was a mistake? Well, yes, in 1992, it was a mistake, absolutely. The resources that they put into the Amiga 600 should have been put into the Amiga 1200 and the newer chipset that was coming out with that. They should have brought that out a couple of months earlier, maybe in early 1992 instead. And the 500 Plus could have continued to sell from 1990 until 1992 when the Amiga 1200 came out, filled in that gap quite nicely. So we've determined that the Amiga 600 was utter crap. Just throw them out the window. Nobody wants them. Nobody should own one, right? Nay, nay. See, we Amigans are nothing if not creative and resourceful. So over the years, people have come up with really awesome ways to expand the Amiga 600 and make it really incredibly useful in today's Amiga market. But first, let's pop the lid and let's see what's inside and what this little Amiga 600 looks like under the hood. Take a look. Let's take a look at the inside of the Amiga 600. Now, the first thing that you'll notice is there's literally only one socketed chip in the entire unit, and that is the ROM socket. Now, I've got this updated to a Kickstart ROM 3.2, but it'll handle anything from a 1.3, which will be basically non-bootable without special coding, 2.05 up to a 3.2 ROM. It can handle them all just fine. Right above here, we have our 68,000 CPU running at a speedy 8 megahertz. This is also firmly entrenched on the motherboard. Up above that, we have our Denise chip, which is not socketed and is in this PLCC format. Down here we have Gale, which is a gate array chip. and the lovely and fairly chubby Fat Agnes chip that gives us our up to 2 megabytes of chip RAM, as long as we have something in the expansion bay down here. Over here we have our beautiful Paula, which gives us our 4-voice stereo sound. This is still basically the same chip as came in the Amiga 1000, just a couple of minor revisions, but no added features, just in a new form factor. And then down here we have 1 megabyte of onboard RAM. Here we have a connector for our hard drive, power, and floppy lights. Now my connector is broken, so we're going to be replacing that. Mouse and joystick ports over here. A lot of people complain because they're on the side and they stick out the side and it makes it a little harder to use the mouse, and I don't disagree with that. Here we have our connector for our standard 880K floppy. Right here I've got a Gotek on that, and then over here we have our PC MCIA socket. This is going to allow us to use 16-bit cards, memory cards, networking cards, compact flash adapters. Very handy little thing. Along the back we have an RF modulator. This little guy is coming out very quickly. I've got a special surprise coming in for that. Our composite connector, which is actually kind of nice. The video quality is fine. And then along the back we have our standard RGB monitor, disk drive, serial, parallel. I guess that's it. Now this is a version 1.5 of the motherboard, so it's probably middle of the road. The expansion bay on the Amiga 600 is very, very tiny and compact. It fits a nice little card like this. Really, it's designed by Commodore just to put in 1 more megabyte of chip RAM and possibly a real-time clock. Now people have finagled a couple of other things in here, but not many. Like, it will pass through the signals for the clock port. So I have 2 clock ports on here, where in theory I could put a USB adapter in here, or I could use the temperature sensor from Amiga Kit that runs in the clock port, which is great. It would have been nice if this interface passed through directly to the 68000 chip, so then we could use this for small accelerators. But I think you'll agree, considering the small amount of real estate that we have here, it would be difficult back in 1992 or 1993 to make an accelerator and fit a processor and some RAM and a hard drive interface or whatever on a little tiny platform like this. So that's probably why Commodore didn't bother with it. The integrated IDE that's built into the Amiga 600 is pretty close to the same thing that's built into the Amiga 1200, which is an unbuffered interface. It just has a direct line to the CPU, and it's not particularly intelligent, but it also means you can't use a very long cable on here. Now, my original intention was to use this IDE to CF adapter, and then I've got this little 3-inch cable here, and use that and just lay it down in there. But I noticed that even in normal Amiga 600 mode, it really did not recognize this adapter. I think it may be the cable maybe is too long. Maybe I just need one of the little 2-inch or 1-inch cables, and that's the only thing that's going to work in this. So what I'm doing instead, from my friends at RetroReady.1, Lucas there sells these adapters, which plug directly into the IDE, and then you can just slot your nice CF card right in there, and it fits perfectly in the Amiga 600 case, and everything I've tried in this Amiga 600 recognizes this perfect. So let's go ahead and put this one in. Perfect. You see, it fits right in. Doesn't take up a lot of space, doesn't interfere with any other add-ons for the most part. She's a pretty little beast, isn't she? I really don't mind that everything's not socketed in there. It's all just, soldered on, because this is a low-end Amiga. You want expansion, you want power, you want flexibility. Buy a big box Amiga. Now, this should have been the Commodore 64 of the 1990s, and if they'd played their cards right, it maybe could have been. Now, within a few years of the Amiga 600 release, people had come up with a way to expand the memory beyond the 4 megabytes that Commodore officially supported. They came up with a little trick to pop a card right on top of the CPU that would talk directly with the CPU, since the PCMCIA didn't really do that. But this brought out one of the Amiga 600s and then later the Amiga 1200's most glaring weaknesses, and that is the PC MCIA socket. See, if you add more than 4 megabytes of fast RAM to one of these machines when you're using 24-bit RAM, which is what the Amiga 600 and the Amiga 1200 both used because of their processors, it deactivates the PC MCIA slot. That slot has an address range between the 4 meg and the 8 meg address range that's set aside so you can slot in a memory card and hey, there it is, auto config. That's great, that's brilliant, no problem at all. But if you try and go beyond 4 megabytes of onboard memory with another card, it overwrites that area, turns the PC MCIA slot off. It was a horrible decision that reduced the functionality of the PC MCIA slot beyond belief. It was just a poor decision. Now, if you use an accelerator on an Amiga 1200, like an 030 or an 040 using a real 32-bit chip with real 32-bit RAM, those problems go away because that uses a much higher address space than the 24-bit RAM, and you can add as much memory as you want to, and the PC MCIA still works. But that option wasn't really available on the Amiga 600. But fast forward 25 years, and suddenly we have some very nice solutions for our Amiga 600 that overcome, or fairly easily overcome, some of these limitations. Let's open mine up and see what I've done to modernize this little guy for the 21st century. Take a look. Now take a note of this little beauty right here. We're going to get back to that in just a minute, but let's get the top taken off and see what's inside. There you go. Now we're going to get back to this red beast in a minute. That's the Furia. First of all, we've already covered this little card, which is our compact flash interface, IDE to compact flash from RetroReady.1. This, I think, is the ideal card for something like this. It just seems so compatible. Now you may be asking what this long wire is right here. The keyboard LED connector, ta-da, is notoriously short, like that long right there. That's just sad. So when you go to take the keyboard off, immediately, wham, you can't do it because this cable's like a centimeter long. And what happens is it puts a little pressure on these pins that are soldered in right there and rips those right out, just like mine were ripped out. So I had to resolder those right there. Then what I did is I took an extension cable, just a male that plugs into the female here, and I just ran it right down, nice 10-inch extension cable, down to the pin header down here. Works absolutely perfect. So I strongly recommend doing that so you can open up your Amiga 600 case without ripping out your LED headers. Thanks to Chris Edwards for that recommendation. That's great, buddy. Thanks. Now, in place of a floppy, I use this GoTech from amigastore.eu. Now, just about any GoTech is going to work just fine as long as it's for an Amiga, and there's plenty of stores that sell them. Now, there's 2 screw holes on the back that line up with the 2 screws for the floppy and mount right in. And if you've got your little metal floppy plate that I believe came with these Amiga 600s, you can also mount it right there. Mine has the little metal pin. Let me take a look and show you. Right here, mine has this little metal piece. I don't know if that's something that was added later or not, but what I'm going to do is drill a hole right here in the GoTech, then put a screw right through there, and it'll just help hold the GoTech in place because it's a little floppy right now. Get it? A little floppy? Oh. Now you'll notice my OLED display on the side is completely blank. That's because I took another extension cable here, plugged it in here, matched up all the wires, and I carefully ran it right through those vent holes right there. And when I say carefully, I mean do it carefully, because you're going to be putting one of the thicker pin headers through these gaps, and you have to gently open these up just a little bit, separate them so it has enough room to fit right through. But it's doable. And then what I did is I used this 3D printed case from my buddy David Z. He printed this for me. And you see it just clips right in to any wedge-shaped Amiga, and you can mount the OLED display right in there. I just use a little tape to hold it in place. Now, down at the bottom here, these pins normally stick straight down, so when you put on the little header, it actually hits the bottom of the case and doesn't let you slot this into place properly. So I very, very carefully bent these pins at about a 90-degree angle, very carefully, and then I was able to put this adapter in there. The whole thing fits underneath the housing, and look what happens. All of the different things on your GoTech right from the top of your Amiga, instead of twisting your neck around and looking over at the side of the machine to try and see what you're clicking on. Now the next thing I'll do is probably get some kind of rotary dial and then mount it to the top, maybe right here, so I can just turn a little dial. And again, I don't want to damage the case at all, but just have a little rotary right there so I can just do a little rotary thing. Easier than hitting the buttons. Worked out pretty cool. Now this is the star of the show here. This is the Furia. Now I got mine from amigastore.eu. They do a fantastic job of making these, but the original design is by Lotharek. It's probably one of the most popular accelerators available for the Amiga 600. See right here, there's a socket right under here that clips on top of your 68,000 chip. Pops right into place. Now I've read horror stories of people not being able to get these on, but I'll tell you what, mine, you put it down, click, click, boom, you're in place. The whole thing took like 15 seconds. Never had an issue. I've actually had it off 3 or 4 times when I've been doing testing. Works fine every time. Now under here we've got a nice 68020 EC chip, so it is a hybrid 1632-bit chip, but that's great. It's clocked at about 33 to 35 megahertz. It's got a nice 68882 FPU clocked at 40 megahertz. I use the FPU on a lot of my software. It comes in super handy. It also comes with a total of 9.5 megabytes of available fast RAM. But Douglas, you say, the EC 68020 is limited to only 8 megabytes of fast RAM. And you're absolutely true. So where does this magical 1.5 megabytes that's available come from? Well, it's called Ranger RAM, and it's existed since the Amiga 500 days. The original A500, with 512 kilobytes of chip RAM and 512 kilobytes of fast RAM, it sort of used it. We called the 512 kilobytes of fast either slow fast or half-assed RAM. Haha, because it was slower than real chip RAM. Once we started getting 1 megabyte and 2 megabyte Agnes chips, like this little beauty down here, the addresses moved around a bit, and the slow fast RAM area, it was sort of freed up, but nobody really could reliably use it. But several years back, our enterprising engineers figured out a way for the Amiga 600 and 1200 to locate RAM like this, 1.5 megabytes, in that unused area and do it reliably. And some accelerators started allowing us to add 1.5 megabytes of extra memory to the memory pool. Now most cards need a special command to add the memory to the memory pool. And the Furia tune that I'm going to show you in just a few minutes does just that. Now you may also have heard a lot about the Furia and its incompatibility with some CF cards. Absolutely true. Just buy a SanDisk, a fast SanDisk, and you'll be happy. Just buy a good interface like this with a direct connection to the IDE bus, not with a 4-inch cable, not something designed for a PC. Get something designed for the Amiga, and it'll work just fine. I suspect this card came with the latest firmware because it's a new card, and it does help with compatibility. Like I've mentioned before, I've tried the A600 with 3 different CF cards. Works perfect every time. Now that the Furia is in place, we can boot up to our install ADF on our GoTech drive over there and start installing Amiga OS 3.2. Let's take a look. So now we have a nice Amiga OS 3.2 install on here. 2 megabytes of chip RAM. It's showing 9 megabytes of free fast RAM because of the Ranger RAM. And it was very, very snappy. I was pleased with the performance, but hard drive performance it's just using the standard onboard Amiga IDE interface, which is about 700 kilobytes per second, and it was reading my 3.2 ROMs from the 16-bit ROM socket, which slows things down a little bit. So there is a cool utility that is a free download when you buy the Furia, and the name of that is Furia Tune. We're going to give it a little launch here, a little question mark, and it tells you what options you have available. Status displays the current Furia config. Reboot will reboot the Amiga immediately. Default sets it back to the default. FPU turns the FPU on or off. Cache turns the cache on or off. This one is critical. IDE on or off. You want to turn IDE on. That is going to increase the performance of your hard drive from 700 kilobytes up to about 2.6 megabytes per second. Much better. Shadow ROM, if you have a ROM already on your machine like I do, an Amiga OS 3.2 ROM, Shadow ROM will copy that to 32-bit RAM and allows the ROM to be accessed faster. Map ROM file, if you're using an older version of the ROM on board, what you can do is take a ROM file, and this will load it into 32-bit RAM and do a kind of a soft kick with a reboot. That's kind of cool. AddMem is where you add the extra 1.5 megabytes of memory. You don't use AddMem and you only get 8 megabytes of RAM. Now, the Furia Tune software is okay. The documentation is okay, but nowhere in the documentation does it really even mention that when you use Furia Tune, with most options, you're just basically setting them for that one boot up, and as soon as you shut down the machine, the Furia goes back to the defaults. So what you're going to want to do is go into your startup sequence like I have here. Now I've got this C:*Furia Tune, IDE on, Shadow ROM, AddMem, speeding up the IDE, relocating the onboard ROM to Shadow ROM, and running the AddMem. That just runs on every boot up of the machine, makes the card perform flawlessly. Now with my Furia installed in this little computer is every bit as fast as my Amiga 1000 with my classic 520 accelerator, which you know I absolutely love. Plus it gives it the benefit of an actual 40 megahertz FPU, which again I use all the time with the software that I use on the Amiga. Sysinfo reports it's a lot faster than Amiga 600, it's faster than Amiga 1200, it's even faster than a 25 megahertz 68030 based Amiga 3000, and it's probably true because the CPU is actually chugging out faster. On my PC MCIA slot on my Amiga 500, I keep a networking card in there. It's a nice little CNET that has an Ethernet connector on the back of it. Now, it's only going to work when the Amiga is in 4 megabyte memory mode, okay? When the Furia is set to full 8 megabytes, it doesn't even see the card. It doesn't even know the card exists. But here's the cool thing. On the Amiga, hold down Amiga control for 3 seconds. And when the Amiga reboots, the Furia detects that and it sets the memory to 4 megabytes of fast RAM and 1.5 megabytes of Ranger RAM if you've got your Furia Tune set to use that. 5.5 megabytes of fast RAM, your PC MCIA is totally active. We can launch iBrowse, we can launch FTP software, it all works fine. Now, we're not going to win any awards using a web browser on an Amiga 1600, I'm sorry, on an Amiga 600 in 16 colors, all right? But it's absolutely functional, and things like AmiNet, they work absolutely perfectly. There's AmiNet right up there. Download things all you want to, and you know, there's still a good 30 or 40% of websites that look okay with a browser like this. Not perfect, but you know, okay, so it's fun to use. So we have an Amiga 600 with a 68020 running at about 35 megahertz. We've got 11.5 megabytes of fast RAM. We got 2 megabytes of chip RAM. This, my friends, is nearly a perfect WHD load workstation. This small, tiny, compact size, put in a nice 32 gig SD card or a CF card, and you can store just about the entire Amiga games library, if you legally own copies of the games, that is. Perfect for WHD load. We've got 0 issues once we install WHD load. Hey, look, there's Turbo Tomato. Look for a review on that coming up this week. Something like Apidia works absolutely perfectly from WHD load. There we go. Kill the bugs, kill the bugs. Die, bugs, die. This game feels particularly appropriate because here in Tucson, we've had a lot of rainy weather and a lot of humid weather, and it's brought out tons of mosquitoes and tons of flies. So this feels actually really good that I'm taking a little revenge on all the bugs that are invading. This is a great 2-player game too. Daniel and I probably need to do a review on this one. Now, games installed right on the hard drive, like Turbo Tomato from our good friends at BitmapSoft, again, reviews coming up soon, these work absolutely perfectly on the Amiga 600 with a Furia Accelerator. We'll just take a quick look at it. Yay, there's my little tomato doing violence to other vegetables in the garden. Die, strawberry, die. Feel my wrath, wimpy. Oh! So what does the future hold for my personal little Amiga 600? Am I done upgrading it? Is that even a real question? I have an RGB to HDMI solution winging its way in from Europe right now. And this is not one of those Amiga 600 ones where you have to solder on 27 different solder points to grab signals. This gentleman, Joachim, what he has is a special one that fits right over the Denise chip in here and then mounts right where your RF modulator would go, which needs to really be removed to be most effective. And that's it. Then you put your Pi Zero in here, you put your software on the Pi Zero, and you've got RGB to HDMI, perfect RGB signal coming out. I'm gonna love this thing. We're gonna do a review on it as soon as it comes in a week or so. She's also gonna need a nice recap. These are the original caps from 1994, so it's got to go in for recapping. And who's gonna do that recapping? Our friends at RetroRewind.ca. You'll see their link right down here, and I'll also have it in the description. Frank does a great job. He takes in just about any kind of Amiga you can imagine, and for a very reasonable price and fast turnaround, we'll recap that little puppy and have it purring like a kitten. I'm going to send mine in as soon as I'm done with this video. It'll go in next week. I'm also going to ask him very nicely, and Frank, if you're watching, please, 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 can you also maybe desolder my RF modulator so I can put my new RGB to HDMI in there? Because my soldering abilities are mediocre. So what's my opinion of the Amiga 600? Well, Doug from 1992, he still thinks the thing is silly. He thinks the thing's absurd and a complete waste of money. And he's right. Now, Doug from 2021, he loves this thing because of all the cool new expansions that have been available for it. You know, you can stick a vampire in one of these if you want to. He's all on board with the Amiga 600 now. He's changed his mind. Now, Doug from 2021 is going to stop talking in the third person and instead open up a beer that was sent to him from his good friend Sanxian that came along with the Amiga 600. This is the Tintagel Brewery, real ale from the home of King Arthur, Castle Gold, brewed with pure Cornish spring water. Oh, this is gonna be good. And you guys are going to get to see me enjoying this delicious beer while my patron list scrolls by. And you too can become a patron. Yummy, yummy, yummy. Pour one out here. Huh. Look at that head on this thing. Now, you too can become a patron and join this increasingly blurry list of patrons by popping on over to 10mark on Patreon, which is patreon.com/10mark. And for as little as $2 a month, you can become part of this illustrious list. Wouldn't that be great? So in honor of my good friends, Cody, Eric, and Tim from Pixel Gaiden Podcast, which you guys, if you guys don't listen to Pixel Gaiden Podcast, the minute that this Retrocast is over, just open up your podcast streamer, go to their website, take a look at what they do. But in honor of my friends at Pixel Gaiden, who rate beer every week on an absolutely obscure scale based on whatever they're doing or drinking at the time, I'm going to rate this on, say, 600 failed Commodore marketing executives. And this one gets a 540 in my book. Good beer. So thank you so much for joining me today. I truly appreciate it. You'll see lots and lots more about this Amiga 600 in the coming months as I do more things on it. She's going to be used to create some of my submissions for Amiga Art Contest 2021. You have heard of that, right? You do know that that's coming up in October and you need to get your artwork into me. To find out more about it, click on that little link that's going to appear right here and it'll tell you all about it. Please like and subscribe. Comment below. Tell me all about your adventures with the Amiga 600, how you've expanded, but what you do with it, and so on and so forth. But until next time, this is Mark from 10Doug. Outing signs or something? I don't remember. Good stuff.